the Honorable the President.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as the Supreme Being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth, and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations, so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in this Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Announcements by the President.
Honorable Senators, I have granted leave of absence to Senator the Honorable Dennis Moses, Senator Wade Mark, Senator Saddam Hussein, and Senator Jennifer Raffoul, all of whom are out of the country. Honorable Senators, I have received the following correspondence from Her Excellency the President, Paula Weeks. The Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, by Her Excellency Paula Weeks, President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. To Mr. Eli Zakur, whereas by instrument dated the 11th of May 2018, I appointed you to act as a temporary senator with effect from the 11th of May 2018 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of Senator Gerard Ramdeen. In exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44 of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and acting in accordance with the advice of the Leader of the Opposition, I, Paula Weeks, President as aforesaid, do hereby revoke with immediate effect your appointment to act as a temporary senator, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the Office of the President St. Anne's this 15th day of May 2018. To Mr. Gavin Simonet, whereas Senator the Honorable Dennis Moses is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of absence from Trinidad and Tobago, now therefore I, Paula Weeks, President as aforesaid, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Gavin Simonet, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 15th of May 2018 and continuing during the absence out of the country of Senator the Honorable Dennis Moses, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the Office of the President St. Anne's this 14th day of May 2018. To Ms. Jerlene John, whereas Senator Wade Mark is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago, now therefore I, Paula Weeks, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(b) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, acting in accordance with the advice of the Leader of the Opposition, do hereby appoint you, Jaylene John, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 15th of May 2018 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of Senator Wade Mark, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the Office of the President St. Anne's this 14th day of May 2018. To Mr. Eli Zakur, whereas Senator Saddam Hussein is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago, now therefore I, Paula May Weeks, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(b) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, acting in accordance with the advice of the Leader of the Opposition, do hereby appoint you, Eli Zakur, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 15th of May 2018 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of Senator Saddam Hussein, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the Office of the President St. Anne's this 14th day of May 2018. To Mr. Sean Sobers, whereas Senator Gerard Ramdeen is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago, now therefore I, Paula May Weeks, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(b) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, acting in accordance with the advice of the Leader of the Opposition, do hereby appoint you, Sean Sobers, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 15th of May 2018 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of Senator Gerard Ramdeen, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the Office of the President St. Anne's this 14th day of May 2018. To Mr. Ronald Gahiris Duke, whereas Senator Jennifer Raffoul is incapable of performing her duties as a senator by reason of her absence from Trinidad and Tobago, now therefore I, Paula May Weeks, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(c) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Ronald Gahiris Duke, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 15th of May 2018 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator Jennifer Raffoul, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the Office of the President St. Anne's this 14th day of May 2018. Honorable Senators, senators are required to take the oath.
I, Garvin Simonet, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
I, Jaylene John, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
I, Eli Zakur, having been appointed a member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and I will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
I, Sean Sobers, having been appointed a member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
I, Ronald Duke, having been appointed a member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, and will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, which I am about to enter.
Bills brought from the House of Representatives, petitions, papers.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following paper as listed on the order paper in the name of the Minister of Finance. The consolidated audited financial statements of First Citizens Holdings Limited for the financial year ended September 30, 2017. Thank you, Madam President.
Reports from committees, urgent questions, questions on notice, urgent questions.
Senator Amin.
Madam President, question to the Minister of Education. In light of reports that termination letters have been served to 30 members of the academic staff of UTT, can the Minister indicate the impact this action will have on the institution and the delivery of the academic program?
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The University of Trinidad and Tobago is involved in teaching as well as research, so that the computation of individual workloads has to take into account both teaching and the research output. After a thorough analysis of the staffing at UTT and the workload of lecturers, those who have been scheduled for termination are surplus to the requirements of the university to provide the same level and quality of service and programs that currently obtain. Therefore, the termination of those persons will have no impact on the institution's ability to deliver its academic programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. In addition to these 30, there is reported to be more than 100 other persons who are supposed to be dismissed. Can you say whether the government intends to continue dismissal at UTT?
Senator Amin, I won't allow that question. Okay, next question.
Madam President, I just want to draw the minister's attention to a specific situation, ask his answer. A lecturer who is teaching a course who has been dismissed, what would happen with that course? There are a number of persons, academic staff.
I think you've asked the question. Yes, Minister?
So he doesn't look like he doesn't understand.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I do not micromanage the University of the West Indies, of Trinidad and Tobago. The University of Trinidad and Tobago is governed by a board, and the board is responsible for the work of management of the university, and therefore that question will be better asked of the board or of the management of the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.
Next question, Senator Obika.
Thank you, Madam President. To the Minister of Health, having regard to the protest action taken by workers on the construction site of the new Point 14 Hospital, owing to the non-payment of wages, what measures are being taken by the Ministry to immediately address this issue?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the issue that Senator has raised rests squarely with the main contractor at Point 14 Hospital, which is VAMED, and I have spoken to VAMED this morning to have that issue resolved in the shortest possible time. It is an issue that the main contractor, VAMED, has to attend to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam President. Could the Minister give an indication as to any possible timeline?
Minister.
I have asked VAMED to have this solved in the shortest possible time.
Senator Obika.
Madam President, could the Minister indicate if this issue arose as a result of lack of funds from the government?
Minister.
It arose because of a dispute between one subcontractor called Innovo and a subcontractor he employed called Lalchan Diosaran. Had nothing to do with lack of funding, but had to do with a dispute between Innovo and his subcontractor, Lalchan Diosaran. Had nothing to do with funding.
Questions for oral answer.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I am pleased to announce that the government will be answering question numbers 107, 122, and 130, and we ask for a deferral of 2 weeks to question 121.
Question 121 is deferred for 2 weeks. Senator Amin.
Madam President, with your leave, I would like to pose question 107 to the Minister of Health, which was provided by Senator Wiedmer.
Minister of Health.
Thank you again very much, Madam Speaker. According to published data from the Central Statistical Office, the infant mortality rate has declined significantly from 24.2 per 1,000 live births in 2002 to 12.7 per 1,000 live births in 2012, thus representing a decrease of 47.5%. Further, in a 2018 UNICEF report, the infant mortality rate for Trinidad and Tobago was estimated at 12.6 per 1,000 live births. According to the World Factbook, the 2017 estimates for infant mortality rates in other developing and developed countries are as follows: Jamaica, 12.7, St. Lucia, 10.9, Barbados, 10.2, the British Virgin Islands, 12.1, Thailand, 9.2, Canada, 4.5, and Switzerland 3.6. In light of the above, Trinidad and Tobago's infant mortality rates and ranking is not significantly higher than regional and even developed countries, as it is close to single digits. The following measures have been undertaken and ongoing by the Ministry of Health to substantially reduce the current rate to single digits in keeping with the target outlined under the Sustainable Development Goals. 1. Major infrastructure upgrades and new projects include the upgrade of the neonatal unit of the Port of Spain General Hospital during 2016 and 2017, opening of the new wing and temporary labor ward at the San Fernando General Hospital, inclusive of 6 neonatal intensive care beds in 2017, upgrade of capacity at the neonatal care unit at the Scarborough General Hospital in 2017, the commencement of construction of the new maternity ward at the San Fernando General Hospital in 2018, and the establishment of a neonatal unit at the Sangre Grande Hospital to be fully operationalized by 2018. The purchase of transport incubators in 2017 to improve the care of babies during transfers. The use of infant anatomic models in 2018 as part of a USAID program to train and re-educate healthcare workers on resuscitation of the newborn. The recent update and use of maternal and neonatal clinical guidelines to reduce the potential health risks of mortality and morbidity to an unborn child and to improve the outcome of mother and baby. Some of the key guidelines include 1. The diabetes and hypertension in pregnancy guidelines to reduce loss of mother and baby. The shoulder dystocia guideline to prevent trauma and birth injury to babies. The hemorrhage guidelines to reduce loss of mother and baby. Strengthening of the adverse events near-miss analysis and reporting in order to improve clinical practices and outcomes. The introduction of a perinatal information system at all RHAs, including Tobago, in November 2015. The use of standardized definitions and reporting templates for all public and private maternity units in 2017. Strengthening of the health education and dissemination of information on social media platforms on the potential risk of going into pregnancy with obesity, diabetes, hypertensive conditions, and other health issues. Training of staff on the updated standardized protocols and emergency care and resuscitation, and the use of domiciliary teams and primary health care professionals at all RHAs in 2018 to visit mothers in the few critical days of birth to ensure there are no complications such as jaundice, poor feeding, and sepsis. Madam President, I thank you.
Madam President, a supplemental question to the Minister of Health. In attempting to achieve this SDGs, does the government, during any time in the balance of its term, have plans for use of the Couva Children's Hospital to achieve this goal?
Madam President, it is hypocritical to ask about the achievement of SDGs when those in power between 2010 and 2015 did nothing to achieve the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, which spoke to our infant mortality rates by 2015. We are paying attention to all of these things. You cannot solve all the issues at one facility because the Children's Hospital, which you built in Couva, did not have a neonatal intensive care unit. Do you know that? They built a $1.6 billion 80-bed children's hospital and did not put in that facility a neonatal intensive care unit. What a tragedy. That is why when oil was $100, you couldn't do it. We are now upgrading the Port of Spain General Hospital, the Port of Spain Maternity Hospital, with one of the most modern NICUs in the Caribbean. For the first time, we are putting a NICU in Sangre Grande. Why didn't you do that? Why didn't you fix the NICU in San Fernando? Why didn't you fix the NICU in Tobago when oil was $100 a barrel?
Minister, I think you've answered the question.
Thank you
Another
very much, Madam
supplementary
President.
question.
Madam President, I would like the Minister to state categorically whether the facility at Couva is going to be used inclusive of all the others, which I appreciate. You spoke about Port of Spain, San Fernando, and so on. So the question, Minister, do you intend to include the Couva Children's Hospital as well as all the others you mentioned?
Madam President, you cannot use the Couva Children's Hospital to treat newborns because you did not put in a neonatal intensive care unit. That is why you can't use it. You built an 80-bed...
Minister, I think you've made that point.
Thank you.
Senator Amin, do you have a further supplementary question on this? No? Next question. Senator. Senator, meantime is moving on. Next question, please.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to ask question number one. Sorry, I want to ask for question 122, which was posed by Senator Wademark, to be deferred until he returns. Yeah, Obika.
Next question, Senator Obika.
Thank you, Madam President. Question number 130 to the Minister of Finance.
Acting Prime Minister.
Madam President, the government has not yet finalized the allocation methodology for the units or shares in the initial public offering for the National Investment Fund. However, standard procedures, including the allocation methodology, will be utilized to ensure that the IPO distribution is not abused. Restriction of beneficial ownership is thus under active consideration.
Senator Obika.
Thank you, Madam President. Given that the Honorable Acting Prime Minister indicated that next month is the date for the rollout of the NIF, could he give some assurances that he would return to the Parliament before then regarding restriction of beneficial ownership?
That question does not arise. Next question, Senator Obika.
Could the Honorable Minister give any assurances that he will give restrictions on beneficial ownership?
That question also does not arise. Next question, Senator Obika.
You're done?
Move the adjournment of the Senate on definite matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, introduction of bills, motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate and moved by a minister, public business, government business, bills, second reading.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Supplement and Vary the Appropriation of the Sum, the issue of which was authorized by the Appropriation Financial Year 2018 Act 2017, be now read a second time. Madam President, the mid-year review program before you is two-pronged in its approach. Firstly, to consolidate the country's fiscal position, and secondly, to provide the impetus for growth through policy and fiscal measures that is so critical in these economic circumstances, while concomitantly encapsulating government's broad economic fundamentals. It would be remiss of me, Madam President, not to remind the Senate that the financial year 2018 budget was framed against a continuing declining revenues as well as significant fiscal and external imbalances caused in part by the collapse of world commodity prices, which began in 2014 and which this administration met when it assumed office in 2015. Madam President, our budgeted revenue for 2018 is predicated on an oil price of US $52 and a gas price of $2.75 per MMBTU. It should be noted that our assumed oil price at that time was below the International Monetary Fund's forecast of $56.20 per barrel for 2018 and lower than the current oil price forecast made by the World Bank, the United States Energy Information Administration, and the International Energy Agency. There has been renewed optimism in the oil markets as OPEC rolled over its production cuts until the end of 2018, and this has offered some relief to our own revenues. Madam President, a deepening economic crisis in Venezuela and the approaching deadline for the United States decision on the Iran nuclear deal combined to push the West Texas Intermediate above US $70 for the first time in years. This occurred on May 8, 2018, which was just last week. Henry Hub gas prices are also trending moderately upwards, averaging in the October 2017 to March 2018 period at approximately $3 per MMBTU, and over the near term, prices should prevail. This too is above the 2018 budget estimate. However, due to the volatile nature of the market and competitive forces at play, we will simply have to wait and see how these prices move in the short to medium term. We in the Ministry of Finance will continue to be vigilant in monitoring the effect of the changes in commodity prices on our revenues and will adapt our macroeconomic fundamentals to be aligned accordingly. Additionally, Madam President, the Ministry of Finance is determined that the oil and gas price assumptions and other assumptions which form the basis for the 2018 budget should remain as is for the time being. Madam President, commodity prices are exogenous in nature, that means outside of our control, but have profound effects on all our economic sectors, that is, the real, fiscal, monetary, and external sectors. The adverse movements of these prices in 2014 have had a consequential effect since then on our balance of payments, our domestic fiscal position, and because government expenditure is significant as a multiplier effect in the economy, the GDP is also impacted. Madam President, the almost 75% decline in crude oil prices from what obtained in 2014 at almost US $108 a barrel to US $26 a barrel in 2016 led to a decline in petroleum revenues by almost $20 billion to less than $1 billion in financial year 2016, which was further exacerbated by a parallel decline in production levels. However, the outlook is favorable, and given the recent market trends, the U.S. States Energy Information Administration of May 8, 2018, has projected an average oil price of US $65.58. So while it is unlikely that revenues will return to the historic highs of 2011 to 2014, it does represent the positive revenue projection that will enable a point of fiscal balance. Madam President, it is this administration's prudent and diligent management of the fiscal deficits, foreign exchange, inflation, and interest rates which bear testimony in maintaining economic stability in these very challenging economic times. These conditions are also necessary to ensure that unemployment remains within reasonable levels. In fact, the third quarter of 2017 recorded an unemployment level of 5.3%. This is no small feat given the situation we inherited in 2015. Madam President, between 2013 and 2016, economic growth was less than desirable and wavered between 1% and minus 6%. Further, because of the better than expected increases in natural gas production in the second half of 2017, the GDP figures for 2017 are being revised upwards, and we expect that instead of negative growth of minus 2.6% in 2017, the actual growth figure will be closer to minus 1%. Madam President, our thrust in reversing declining gas production levels and other factors have been successful, and we expect GDP forecast of 2% in 2018, 2.2% in 2019, rising to 2.5% in 2020. And my colleague, leader of the government business, will give us more information as to what steps we have taken in the area to deal with declining gas production. Madam President, in the external sector, according to data from the Central Bank, our net official reserves stood at $11.5 billion as at December 2014. Our external reserves at March 2018 remain healthy at US $9 billion, or roughly 8 months of import cover, which is on par with countries like Kuwait, India, and Jordan. In addition to our external reserves, another important buffer to the volatility from external factors is our Heritage and Stabilization Fund. Madam President, the Heritage and Stabilization Fund was created by Act of Parliament in 2007 and provides, among other things, that savings and investments from surplus revenues be used where necessary to cushion the impact and/or sustain public expenditure capacity during periods of revenue downturn. The last time an injection was made into the fund was financial year 2013, at which time the fund stood at US $5.15 billion. Subsequent to the collapse of global commodity prices in 2014, withdrawals were made in financial year 2016 of an amount of $375 million US, and in financial year 2017 of an amount of $252.2 US million. Notwithstanding these withdrawals, the value of the fund stood at $5.88 billion as at April 30, 2018, which is an increase over what it was in 2015 and represents government's prudent management of this fund. Madam President, generally speaking, economies adjust by using external resources borrowed from multilateral institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF. However, this country is adjusting by utilizing its own reserves, both domestic and external. Madam President, I would like to emphasize that at its last visit, Standard & Poor's did not downgrade Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, Trinidad remains a BBB+, which is an investment-grade credit rating. Standard & Poor's did, however, adjust the outlook from stable to negative. But to that, I would add that we have very recently, last week, received a report from Moody's, and they have maintained the position that we had last year, which is BA1 and stable. And this is based on more current information. Madam President, mindful of these ratings, we continue to be prudent with our management of the economic affairs of this country. As an energy commodity exporter, this country has had to overcome the challenges that began in 2014 when the commodity prices collapsed. This impacted all oil and gas exporters, not just Trinidad and Tobago, and would have adverse impacts on revenues, reserves, and taxes payable by these energy-based companies. Since that time, Madam President, we have been managing the economy and we have begun to realize the benefits of that prudent management. Madam President, the mid-year review program envelops two exercises, variation and supplementation. While we forge ahead with our expenditure program, it is necessary at this stage to consolidate our fiscal position. Government expenditure for the year as a whole has been revised downwards by $1.622 billion, or 3.3%, to $48.879 billion from $50.501 billion. We have examined our fiscal arrangements and now seek an additional $213 million for the following items. One, the Tobago House of Assembly is receiving $20 million to fund and expand the agricultural access roads programs. And my colleague to my right will give you more detail on that as we proceed during the course of the debate. The Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs is receiving $30 million to meet the cost of legal and other fees arising from matters raised in the Commission of Inquiry into CL Financial and Colonial Life Insurance Trinidad Company Limited. 3, the Ministry of Community Development, Culture and the Arts is receiving $2 million to enable the National Commission for Self-Help to assist individuals in Tobago whose homes have been affected by flooding and other damages. 4, the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries is receiving $38 million, of which $31 million will fund the cost of the subsidy due to farmers under the Agriculture Incentive Program, and $7 million will meet the cost of claims submitted by farmers for the loss of crops as a result of excessive rainfall and consequential flooding during the month of October 2017. The Ministry of Social Development and Family Services is being provided with the sum of $23 million to meet expenditure for Senior Citizens Grant to September 30, 2018. And finally, the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries is receiving the sum of $100 million to fund the cost of the petroleum subsidy liability to companies engaged in the sale and distribution of petroleum products. Madam President, in addition, we are seeking to vary expenditure of $796.3 million to expenditure items which need additional funding. Madam President, I wish to give a review of the key projects that will underpin the economic framework. First, and very dear to my heart, the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority. Madam President, like the property tax regime, we have made progress in finalizing the proposed structure of the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority, which is absolutely essential to stop the billion-dollar leakage of tax revenue and tax avoidance that is prevalent in Trinidad and Tobago today. I wish to put honorable members on notice that we will be bringing the required legislation for the Revenue Authority for the consideration of this Honorable House in the very near future, and that after seeking advice from eminent senior counsel, we are of the view that the legislation is best passed with a special majority, requiring your support, of course. It is thus our intention to send the Revenue Authority Bill to a joint select committee of Parliament, and we look forward to the comments, contributions, and recommendations of the independent bench and the opposition on this committee. This major institutional reform would underpin our efforts to stem the revenue collection leakages now inherent at the levels of the Board of Inland Revenue and the Customs and Excise Division, and also to strengthen our compliance risk management methodologies. Madam President, on March 16, 2018, my colleague in the House of Representatives shared the Tax Administration Diagnostic Assessment Tool, otherwise known as TADAT, performance report on Trinidad and Tobago, which was not very complimentary about our local tax authority. The recommendations from this report are guiding our tax reform and modernization agenda with its emphasis on improving business processes and automation. These skills would be enhanced as the staff transitions to the TTRA, which is now embracing best practice standards in domestic tax administration. This would improve efficiency and domestic tax mobilization. We will witness the full benefits of this reform in the next fiscal year in the context of the functioning of the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority. Madam President, the Property Tax Amendment Bill 2018 and the Valuation of Land Amendment Bill 2018, which were recently passed by this House, are intended to clarify certain positions and correct anomalies which exist in the two pieces of legislation. The moratorium with respect to the payment of property tax will be extended at this time to September 2017, and property taxes will become due and payable on or before September of each year. There will be no retroactive application of the property tax. The government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago is committed to protecting the country's revenue base from leakages resulting from transfer pricing. During the remainder of fiscal year 2018, the government will continue its efforts to implement a transfer pricing regime, the objective of which is to strengthen the legal and regulatory framework and capacity of the tax authority in dealing with the issue of transfer pricing manipulations by related parties and multinational companies. Solidifying its commitment, Trinidad and Tobago recently became the 108th country to join the Base Erosion and Profit Sharing Inclusive Framework, BEPS, thereby agreeing inter alia to 1, implement measures aimed at preventing tax avoidance resulting from the artificial shifting of profits to low-tax jurisdictions, 2, to remove harmful provisions in the domestic tax regime, and 3, to implement country-by-country reporting rules for transfer pricing and to exchange reports with other countries. We are in discussions with the World Bank Group to secure technical assistance in introducing a transfer pricing regime based upon the principles embodied in the OECD's transfer pricing guidelines for multinational enterprises and tax administrations. Subject to the approval of Cabinet, the collaboration with the World Bank will commence with an international tax needs assessment, subsequent to which work will begin on establishing the policy and legislative framework that will underpin the transfer pricing regime. The Joint Select Committee has engaged the services of an expert consultant, Governance Associates, to assist with its deliberation of the bill as it commences on a clause-by-clause review of the Gambling, Gaming and Betting Control Bill, and we expect that by June 30, 2018, the review of the Gambling, Gaming and Betting Control Bill will be finished to allow for the passage of the governing legislation. Foreign exchange. Madam President, The government has recognized the challenges that the small and medium-sized sectors face in procuring much-needed foreign currency that is critical for their operations. The US $100 million Exim Bank foreign exchange facility is now operational, and with the grant, as I said earlier, Madam President, small and medium sectors are the ones we focused on.
You want it not to be true. Don't be distracted.
No, I'm not. It's now operational with the grant to Exim Bank of a license by the central bank to trade in foreign exchange. Eligible, established, and fledgling small and medium-sized manufacturers will now be able to access the facility to finance material inputs for their export operations. Madam President, the mid-year review provides an opportunity for consolidation of our fiscal position while monitoring a robust and prudent macroeconomic and development agenda. We have begun the process and are on the track to a steady and sustainable growth path. We continue to monitor and examine the important variables that affect our prescribed policies. In the medium term, we are adjusting the economy to lower levels of revenue and expenditure and aim to derive greater efficiency from growth-stimulated capital projects. We remain committed and results-oriented and continue to walk the walk as we seek to empower the lives of every citizen of our nation. Madam President, I thank you and I beg to move.
Honourable Senators, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is that a bill entitled An Act to Supplement and Vary the Appropriation of the Sum, the issue of which was authorized by the Appropriation Financial Year 2018 Act 2017, be now read a second time. Senator Obika.
Thank you, Madam President. And the moment has not passed on me, the privilege to go first, and I thank the Honorable Kamala Prasad-Bissessar of Senior Counsel, Leader of the Opposition, Leader of the United National Congress, for giving me this opportunity, and of course the next Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. You could be this for that. Good. So, what is important is we are here after 2 years and 8 months of the Dr. Rowley-led PNM government. And instead of direction for the economy, instead of prescriptions for the non-energy sector, what we have been made to face from Thursday to now is ramblings of our Minister of Finance about success, really and truly, which have been negated by his own minister in the ministry, who basically stated that those shocks in energy sector are exogenous to Trinidad and Tobago, meaning we have no control over it. So it is, we have now gone waiting on oil, the savior, to rescue this incomparable, incompetent, Keith Rowley-led PNM government. Now, what exactly would be the foundation of this analysis? Let's look at the outline. The Trinidad and Tobago economy, as the leader of the opposition has stated, has been brutalized and battered by this administration. The economy has crashed. That is clear. Healthcare has crashed. Education sector, well, they have closed the gate. Crime is out of control. And our roads are in a state of disrepair. Now, this talk of turnaround is a mama guy. It's a mama guy, and it's pressing to change from this tightening of your belt for the past 2 years and 8 months as they rush to 2020 for the general elections to face the populace. They have no care for Tobago despite the cries of members opposite. The ferry situation is one blatant example of that. The deception on the energy sector is clear. This government has tried to claim the praise for the sunshine, saying they can see clearly now, when we all know that the truck, the Angelin, the Juniper platforms were as a direct result of the hard work and the foresight of the People's Partnership Government under the leadership of the Honorable Kamala Persad-Bissessar. It is hypocritical for members of the opposite to claim praise for the sunshine, but blaming the decisions of the Minister of Energy at that time to allow accelerated debt recovery. You cannot have your cake and eat it. It is because of these incentives to the energy sector, the upstream players, that we have now an end to the gas curtailment, at least in the medium term. Now, the impact on this, on the negative ratings, if you look at the Moody's prescription. So in 2017, Moody's had downgraded the economy from BA3 to BA1, which basically meant the speculative elements are subject to substantial credit risk. All right? Now, if we take that into perspective, the government didn't like that rating. They went for Fitch. They also looked at the Standard & Poor's rating. But when they realized, here's what, the ratings are not going in our favor. We have done nothing beyond what was done prior to end the gas curtailment issues. And they are citing that because of impending gas curtailment in the future, they are looking at, and we are looking at a negative, a change from stable to negative from Standard & Poor's. They now blame themselves. So after 2 years and 7 months of blaming Kamala, they have now turned to blame themselves. The first in point being the Minister of Energy. If that is not incompetence, Madam President, I don't know what is. Now, also we look at the NIF, the National Insurance Fund, as a saving grace. This government is looking at the operationalization of that to reduce the deficit. But that is a one-time payment. Yes, you may get some returns from the management of the fund going forward, but the loss of the capital, of the assets, is a one-time inflow. The business model for Trinidad and Tobago, what we were expecting, Madam President, was some level of enlightenment as to what will be the business model for this country going forward. But really and truly, we couldn't have expected much when the head of the advisory board resigned, Dr. Terence Farrell, when the person who took his place, Dr. Marley Natz, who was the head of the Department of Economics at the University of the West Indies, gave them a D on the economy. After D is a failing grade as far as the grading system goes at the UWI. You know, and every single economist on the planet has basically said they are at sea and they need to reorient the economy. The only persons who seem to feel that all is well on the non-energy sector are Prime Minister 1 and Prime Minister 2. Now that alone is a definition of madness. But I want to turn to one article, all right? And it's the expressions of a UE economist. He's a young guy, Dr. Valmiki Arjun. It appeared in the Sunday Express of the 13th of May. And he's stating that the growth is meaningless unless it translates into increased value-added productivity and a better quality of life. So they came and said that they can see clearly now. The rain has ended. The sunshine is here. But what exactly are you doing with the money? Now, I will go into that as I develop my presentation. But we are here talking about a variation of 796 million moved out of the IDF to various heads, all for recurrent expenditure. Madam President, that is irresponsibility at the highest level. Because how can it be that we are acknowledging that we need to reorient this economy? We need to have a sound business model for our non-energy sector as we go forward. And the main vehicle by which our country can reorient the economy is the Infrastructure Development Fund. You are taking almost $1 billion out of it and reorienting it into expenses that are recurrent. Now, so that's another point. And borrowing, continuous borrowing for recurring expenditure with no vision, no plan, no idea as to what is required to change the economy. But how can we have expected anything else when they have fired the entire Economic Development Advisory Board. Now, Madam President, I wish to begin with a powerful ancient proverb. Do not look where you fell, but where you slipped. And the people of this country are well aware for the reason for the fall, for the crash of this economy. Because that began on September 7, 2015, when the Dr. Rowley-led PNM government came into power. Now, they have pulled up hard on the handbrakes of the economy. Their deliberate policy of starving the country and creating, to take a page out of the leader of the opposition, creating the perception that things were bad, withhold expenditure on social services, cut employment, suffer the people, then closer to elections, they're going to bring out the butter. After you're sucking salt for 2.5 years, they're going to be bringing out the butter to wipe on your face and hoping you will forget the years of hardship they put on you. The people of Trinidad and Tobago will not fall for that. Now, even, Madam President, PNM stalwarts will not bring themselves within a 10-foot pole of this Dr. Rowley-led PNM. And I'm sure I've been hearing that there are a few Manningites who are opposite, who have to keep a low profile, keep quiet until they can extract the PNM of this incompetent Prime Minister 1 and Prime Minister 2.
I am allowing you to carry on with your contribution. I've allowed you. You're using certain language. I'm leaving it alone. But that one, please apologize and withdraw. Okay?
Apologize. The incompetence of the government, and I withdraw. The incompetence is apparent. It is clear. And it is incomparable. Now, Madam President, we have lost 20,000 jobs since this government came into power. All right? We have lost 20,000. There is a war on senior citizens as they have removed the GATE program from their ability to access education. There is a war on senior citizens in healthcare as they can't get CDAP drugs when they go. There's a war on our children as they have taken the laptops out of the children's school bags in this new dispensation. The future is no longer in the children's school bags. And you will hear more of that from persons as we continue. Now, and this government has sought it fit to punish the population with taxes. Taxes is in the DNA of this Dr. Rowley-led PNM government. Now, Madam President, and at the end of all of that, they have crashed the economy. Now, I want to turn to educating the population as to what we mean by deception. After nearly 3 years in office, the deception is real. We must remember that the increase in expenditure started under the previous PNM government, where it rose from $15 billion in 2002 to $45 billion in 2009. And I'm sure the leader of the opposition would have reminded the nation of that on last week, Thursday. This represented a $30 billion or near 300% increase over that period. In our period prior, it rose from $45 billion to $62 billion. That's a 36% increase. So now, after the government prior having gotten the population accustomed to rampant spending for 9 years, you can't expect to pull so hard up on the handbrakes of the economy. So you had to reorient persons. We had to now bring in programs that would focus the economy on a new business model. Diversification of the entire economy was the agenda. Now looking at the record of spending, as of December 31st, 2017, over $120 billion has been spent. Over $120 billion. When you look at the planned spending for 2018, it should reach $160 billion. In fact, Madam President, in the first 2 years of this government, they have spent more than the first 2 years of our time in office from 2011 and 2012. They have spent $111.46 billion, when the partnership in its first 2 years spent $110.19 billion. So they have spent over $1 billion more. Now, furthermore, the significant foreign reserves have been depleted. We are hearing now of 8 months import cover. That's news because last week it would have been 9 months, according to the Minister of Finance. But the minister in the ministry has indicated that it has gone down to 8 months, unless that was an error. So the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, which this government received untouched untouched, Madam President. They have raided it twice. And they are saying they met a treasury that was empty. $5 billion US, when converted to TT, is not the definition of empty in any treasury in this country. Now, I want to turn to the overdraft. The overdraft facility, Madam President. So, let's establish a fact. This is a fact that must be established. From 2011 to 2017, those fiscal years, the worst that the overdraft facility at the central bank has been maxed out was in financial year 2016 to 2017. That's the second year of this current government, where the overdraft reached $10.57 billion, over $3.5 billion over the limit given the prescribed formula at that time, which was 15%. Now, so this is the inception of the PNM under this Dr. Rowley. For example, when you look at the presentation of the Minister of Finance, stating that they have maxed out the overdraft, when they got it, the overdraft would have been under $1 billion in terms of being maxed out. But they, at the time of him saying that, had carried it to over $3.5 billion. So, I mean, if you want to be responsible, you must give the population the facts. These are the facts. This government has been the most reckless with the overdraft facility at the central bank. Now, so every Monday morning, instead of thinking of new ways to grow the economy, the Minister of Finance is running to the central bank to borrow money, not to buy school books, not to buy CDAP drugs, not to give senior citizens over 50 years, who are not so senior really, access to the GATE program, not to do that. What they are doing is they are going to the overdraft to pay for castles, golf course grooming, legal fees for party hacks in corporations, and over 25 trips of the Prime Minister. They have not generated a single stream of alternative revenue. All they have done is borrow and spend. Tax, borrow, and spend. Now, evidence that the economy was on a solid footing is clear. All one has to do is turn to the Central Bank Economic Bulletin, and you can see clearly, Madam President, in 2015, when the PNM under Dr. Rowley got the reins of the economy, there was 1.5% economic growth. Now, if that is the case, and you have over $5 billion in a US dollars in a Heritage and Stabilization Fund, really and truly, Madam President, you had an economy that you could have worked with. But what they did was they tightened, they cut jobs, and they presented the economy to be such a dark state that eventually what they said became a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's why the economy crashed under this government. So now 2 years and 8 months later, they are still looking for people to blame. They are still looking for people to blame after saying that the Treasury was bankrupt, despite dipping into the Treasury, dipping into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund to cover expenditure. So, Madam President, I see the Minister of Energy is venturing into the realm of finance. But when a politician tells people the Treasury is empty, what they are saying is that there is no money from which to spend. So I don't want the Minister of Energy in his presentation after to mislead the population by saying that there's a fundamental difference between having $5 billion US in a Heritage and Stabilization Fund and having an overdraft facility at the central bank, which really and truly is basically you have some funds about $25 billion, and you borrow against those funds at the central bank. If you go beyond that, you can't go beyond that more than 15% of estimated expenditure. This is not an economics class, but I can assist you in that regard. Now, so budget deficits. Let's turn to the budget deficits. So we all know that this Minister of Finance has missed the mark on 2 occasions. In fiscal 2016, the deficit was projected to be $7.36 billion. But the deficit in actual fact was $12.36 billion. In fiscal 2017, the anticipated deficit was $5.6 billion, but the deficit became $7.1 billion. The projected deficit for 2018 is $10.13 billion. We shall see where that goes. But we know that oil has come as a savior, so they are hoping that things will be better. We are citizens. We are patriots. We all hope that things get better. The only thing is that we would hope that they would listen to their advisors and actually do something to contribute to the better state of the economy. Because should the crisis in the Middle East become averted, should the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia decide to pump more oil on the market to attract market share because maybe Iran is allowed to now to venture into the open market without sanctions, the price of oil may plummet. The reality is we have no control. The price may as well rise to $100 a barrel. We have no control over that situation. So really and truly, what is required is for us to take concerted efforts to focus on the non-energy sector. Now, so these budget deficits, Madam President, runs contrary to the campaign rhetoric, which was shouted across length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago from platform, pillar to post about balancing the budget. We all know that that was not in the capacity of the Minister of Finance. Now, where has the money gone? The people of Trinidad and Tobago are no longer asking this question. Where has the money gone? They are angry because they are seeing where the money is being spent on vanity projects, on castles, on paintings, golf courses, and stated that really cannot be a priority over healthcare, education of citizens, public transport, roads, the inter-island ferry. One is afraid to go to Tobago. Even in Grenada, they are boasting of a boost in tourist arrivals from Trinidad for the Easter period because those persons are now afraid to go to Tobago lest they be marooned in Crown Point or Scarborough. So the government under Dr. Rowley is only concerned with paying rents for buildings of friends and family, like one Alexandria and a building in Faizabad. We already know the road situation is deplorable, Madam President, and the people are abused to the extent that government MPs could say they don't respond to protests, as occurred in the constituency of Labre. I wouldn't say which MP made those statements. So there's key neglect in the industrial areas. Spending over $200 million on a failed company, Massey Communications, is symptomatic of lack of care for the people. That could have gone to giving each child in secondary school a laptop. And as we are planning to do when we return to office, give each child in primary school a tablet. And that tablet is not medicine, eh? We're talking about technology here. So there's no care for the children. Their priority, Madam President, is not the children of Trinidad and Tobago. We have seen what they have done with the Children's Hospital. Ridiculing it. Even the Minister of Health is on Hansard on the 6th of March 2018 in responding to a supplemental question here in the Senate that the Couva Children's Hospital is a vanity project. That is the Minister of Health who came here and shouted from pillar to post today. We will correct the record on that pronouncement by that minister soon. They have no vision, Madam President. They have no care for the children. We have children, we can see they need the funds. What if they are saying, okay, this is not a life-threatening illness, so we're not assisting them. These children are the future of our nation. They should be priority. Why not make adjustments to the Children's Life Fund so you can allow those children access? Because really and truly, you can only pity them, and their case is a just one. Their cause is just. So this is what we are witnessing in Trinidad and Tobago. Vanity projects upon vanity projects. And I turn to the public debt situation. The Minister of Finance, in his presentation on Thursday, wished for a significant increase in the gross domestic product, which would allow for the debt to GDP to fall. That is okay. We all wish for that increase. We all wish for that because that really and truly would improve our credit rating. However, we are only in a position on this side to wish until we come into office. They are in the position to do. And their continuous wishing that oil will save them is at the heart and the root of the problem and the weakness to challenge the issues that surround this economy and that confront the non-energy sector. So, Madam President, Central Bank Economic Bulletin states that the total public sector debt amounted to $120.9 billion in December 2017. If you net that of open market operations, which basically would be debt for sterilization purposes of the economy, the public sector debt increased to $96.2 billion, or 61.6% of GDP, up from $93.8 billion in September 2017. We understand what happened there. The government required some extra borrowing. However, once you go beyond that 60%, which even the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Acting Prime Minister, has acknowledged is a threshold that we wish not to go beyond, you find that there are some negative and long-term challenges that can affect the economy. If there's any immediate negative shock to the economy, that can significantly impact on our debt to GDP levels and also our ability to service debt. So what is the impact on the overall economy? In the result of negative shocks, bankruptcy can occur, economic collapse, and all the attendant ills that are associated, and of course, the dreaded return to the IMF. So these high debt levels could result in a situation that we all are familiar with in economics called debt overhang. It basically means that the requirement to service your debt is so much that you are hamstrung and you are actually using funds that are required for stabilizing and growing the economy to just paying your debtors. Now, the excess liquidity in the commercial banking sector averaged $2.8 billion daily over July to December 2017, compared to $3.4 billion daily in the first half of 2017. So that means the liquidity fell. So there's another scenario that we are facing here, in that the government is now dipping heavily, Madam President, into the local commercial banking sector. And I prepared this note, so I need to read this verbatim with your permission, so that I read it correctly. So the low net domestic fiscal injections reflected government's borrowing from the banking sector during the period. To facilitate public and private transactions in the financial system, Central Bank allowed roughly $3.9 billion of maturing open market securities back to the system from July to December. Therefore, the government, by borrowing from the commercial banking sector, has caused a decline in liquidity, for which the central bank had to take corrective measures. All right? Now, there are many terms that are used that can describe this. One is crowding out of the private sector, but I'm not sure the level of analysis of our economy is so real-time that we can ascertain that. It may take some more, probably a couple of years, before we get the data points that could ascertain whether or not there was crowding out. I stand to be corrected by Dr. Marbury or any other person who is involved in finance to see that if we have real-time access to data. So given the fall-off in liquidity levels in the second half of 2017, interbank borrowing picked up. So they're basically trying to make up for the shortfall because they don't have significant stocks of liquidity. They have to now come at each other regularly to make up that difference. The quarterly sectoral disaggregation of business lending in the last quarter of 2017 underscored the subdued nature of activity in the construction sector as lending to construction companies fell. So there's a whole issue with that. But what we were hoping with this mid-year review, Madam President, was to hear that under the Ministry of Housing, as the Prime Minister has taken, the Honorable Prime Minister has taken up this portfolio, we were hoping to see that some attention would be made to that sector, because we are very well aware that injections via a government housing program heats up the construction sector, which has some attendant benefits for the economy. It may not be the non-energy boom that we want, but it will at least help to stabilize to help persons in their pockets where they feel it most, and help to arrest some of the joblessness that we are facing in the country. So lending to the manufacturing sector fell off by 7.4%. Without adjustment for the reclassification, lending to construction companies declined by 31.9%. Now, the banking sector as well will be hamstrung, and they will be more or less deciding where they lend. And lending to contractors and developers has become such a difficult arena that developers are now turning to rent to own, which may seem to be a creative fix, but really and truly it may not be sufficient to ramp up the home construction and to address the housing shortage that we have in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, taxation obsession. The Minister of Finance recently boasted of his boosted credentials in taxation on his Twitter feed, Madam President. But he seemed to miss the mark on the value-added tax, as the Auditor General's report shows that for fiscal 2017, they fell short of VAT estimates by 3.56 billion, as they estimated to collect 10.17 billion and only collected 6.61 billion. So this shows a failed, this is the Auditor General's report of 30th April 2018, page 51. This shows a failed policy as the taxes on goods and services stood at 8.3, 7.4, and 8.9 billion from 2013 to 2015. All right? But they fell below that at 6.61 billion in 2017. So the introduction of VAT on approximately 7,000 basic items failed to generate additional revenue for the state, but rather resulted in further hardships on the population and lower VAT revenue. I repeat that again, Madam President. This government has failed with its VAT program by increasing hardships on many citizens with the reintroduction of VAT on 7,000 food items, and has also reduced income for the state. So what was the point of that? You could have kept the original regime, which had the 7,000 exempt food items. Now, so this is a clear demonstration, Madam President, of the incompetence, despite the claim of boosted tax credentials. So it shows that textbook and reality are not always in harmony. So in fact, this measure contributed to the feeling of hardship and austerity by the people of Trinidad and Tobago and resulted in depressed consumer spending and eventual crash of the economy. So it is elementary economics, Madam President, that if you raise taxes, if you increase the cost of doing business, if you invite the risk of reduced expenditure by economic participants, and therefore a reduction in tax income by the state is imminent. So the minister has failed regarding taxes. There was one tax that he succeeded in, but I will explain where the failure still lies regarding the supporting the non-energy sector. And that tax has to be the increase in business levy and the Green Fund. I will speak specifically to the business levy. So, Madam President, there's also some misleading data, and there's some fighting with some economists that we have witnessed. And it reminds me of a saying, when you can't get your way, you make a way. But that saying is normally intended for different scenarios. But in this scenario, it rings true to the Minister of Finance and the Dr. Rowley-led PNM government, as they cannot get any economist on planet Earth to agree with them. And their statistics, so they create their own statistics. So the last time real GDP was at current levels, Madam President, was 10 years ago, roughly a decade. Some economists argue that really and truly, we may not see much improvement given the absence of plans to arrest the situation. So we are facing an economy that has regressed by over a decade. Thankfully, the population has not increased by a significant amount. It's basically stagnant, increasing by roughly about 50,000 persons. All economists on planet, the IMF, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, Dr. Marley Natz, Valmiki Arjun, Mariano Brown, the University of the West Indies, Indira Sajuan Ali, Mala Dukaran, etc., are saying that the economy is weak. So that is a clear assertion. We understand that. But what they're also saying is that it's not showing signs of growth. We know that there is microscopic growth planned. Not the 2% growth that the Honorable Minister of Finance would have us believe. However, in the words of one of those economists, Indira Sajuan Ali, show me your sources. Show us your sources. Show the people of Trinidad and Tobago where you got your data from. You know? There's another commentator who made a statement about letting the Minister of Finance continue to speak. He used a synonym of speak, and I wouldn't use that word, because he was quoting the late Dr. Eric Williams. You know? So show me your facts. Where did you get? I would have believed, Madam President, that the Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Finance would have come to this House and explain in detail what is the source and the composition of this growth. Which sectors will it come from? So, for example, if someone is to invest, they have some idle capital, 30 million, 50 million, and they wish to invest in manufacturing, they can find themselves in the appropriate sector because the government would have indicated these are the areas of growth by this amount in these narrow sectors. So the government has failed to be clear. They are saying that they're going to be transparent and they're working with the IMF on fiscal transparency. Where is the transparency in the growth projections? There is none. Now, so Madam President, I turn to the business levy and the green fund. Furthermore, the additional revenue from the business levy in 2016 was 223 million. You recall that they increased the business levy as a percentage, right, of your bottom line. The payment is as a bottom line, but the calculation as a percentage of your total sales, your top line. But they should have used this, Madam President, to support business activity. If you have increased business levy, you have the tire tax, you have the removal of the fuel subsidy, so companies have to pay more for their fleet of vehicles and so on. Even if it's two, it's a fleet. If you have increased corporation tax from 25% when we left office to 30%. Now, they did some changes with 25% above $1 million, and then that was semantics. The real aim was to get it to 30%. So where you find, on our time, your total effective tax rate would have been below 30%, 25% plus the business levy and green fund, which will come out of your bottom line. Now you are finding that you can face as high as 45% tax rate, which of course depends on your margin of profits. If your net profit is about 7 to 9% of your top line figure, you may find that you may be facing, Madam President, almost 45%.
You have 5 more minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So you have companies now who are facing such a harsh tax environment. They are struggling to keep their workers intact. They are struggling to keep afloat. And at the same time, you make more money from them, from the business fund, business levy, and you don't decide 223 million in 2016, and you don't decide to allow them access. You could have a government-backed loan for companies who are involved in the sectors that have been identified for growth. So let's say, for example, you identify manufacturing of agro-based peppers or manufacturing of jams and jellies as a potential growth area in the economy where we have some competitive advantage. You can say, okay, if you set up a factory in these areas, we will back your loan to the value of 20 million, which may be 80% of the facility you might get from the bank. These are practical solutions businessmen were hoping would come from their government. But have no fear. To the business community, to the TTMA, the manufacturers of this country, when we return to office, these are the incentives. We will incentivize business, not necessarily subsidize, but we will incentivize business activity. So there's been an onslaught on business. We have persons to come who will speak on that. But there's an increase in crime. Lack of freedom of movement. The ferry to Tobago is one key issue. The investment climate is down. Madam President, I grieve for the Minister of Trade. She is from my community, Point 14. I grieve for the Honorable Minister of Trade. Because the Minister of Finance gives the Minister of Trade no fiscal strength to give life to the industrial e-tech parks that are all across the country. So, the energy sector outlook. I already said that in TNT, the upstream production was buoyed by the Juniper Field's new natural gas output. The non-energy sector contracted by 1.9%. It's slowest since fourth quarter 2015. But in the wind-up, in the initial presentation, the Minister of Finance boasted that the non-energy sector is growing, is booming. Which booming? It has declined. So really and truly, we need to be honest with it. We need to be factual with these figures. All right? So the government must thank unreservedly the leadership of Kamala Prasad-Bissessar for bringing to light ending the gas curtailment crisis. They must thank the United National Congress. They must thank us on this side for ending that gas curtailment crisis, which they are benefiting from today. Now, Madam President, economic growth. We know that the economic growth is down. We hope that all will be well as we go forward. But there's another issue of youth unemployment. Youth unemployment has skyrocketed. People 15 to 19, 20 to 24, and 25 to 29 years. Unemployment stood at 19.8, 10.3, and 7.3% respectively in quarter 1, 2017. But in quarter 2, 2015, stood at 14.3%, 10.3%, and 4.4%. This government is suffering the youth. We even have a case of over 200 young doctors unemployed. That is unconscionable, Madam President. Now, regarding diversification, once we return to office, we will pursue a path of demand-led related diversification. You don't know what that is. Demand-led related diversification. We will pursue in the development of growth poles across the country. The East-West Corridor will be a pole. In Point 14, the E-Tech Park, which they have left empty, will be populated by businesses that are contributing to the gross domestic product of this country. When we return to office, Madam President, we will erase the 5 years of neglect and the 5 years of absence of vision of this doctoral-led PNM. The National Insurance Fund, I remind you, is a one-time transfer. What is your solution for the revenue shortfall in this country? Oil cannot be the savior. We must find direction, and the government must come back to the population with a plan that makes sense. If not, call election, because we are ready to govern this country. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Senator Shrikissoon.
Thank you, Madam President, for allowing me to... Probably they're looking for Chris Gill. But thank you, Madam President, for allowing me this opportunity to contribute to this bill before us today. And I really want to thank my colleagues on the independent bench for allowing me to commence this debate, to commence or to open this presentation on behalf of our bench. And it's indeed a privilege for me to be able to contribute to the national development of Trinidad and Tobago. I trust that during my presentation, the response of my colleague, Senator Gopee-Scoon, would be different to Senator Obika's in the last 2 minutes of his contribution, and that I'll be able to capture your attention and hold it a little bit more. So as we begin today, I would really like to focus on what's going on in Trinidad and Tobago. And in the recent past, we have noticed, and all of our citizenry would have been aware of the tough economic times facing Trinidad and Tobago. And why did these tough economic times and this hardship upon our citizenry occur? And it was as a result of persistent and continuous budget deficits for the last 10 years. A level of expenditure that could not be sustained, an element of waste and mismanagement of resources across regimes, declining production volumes and falling commodity prices. And I think all of these put together contributed to where Trinidad and Tobago is at this point in time. However, we always look to God, and we always know that there is hope once we trust in God. And Deuteronomy 3:16 says, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." And I do believe that God is watching over Trinidad and Tobago. And having listened to the Minister of Finance and the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, both in the other place and this morning, if the outlook for the future of Trinidad and Tobago is any indication of what, or if the recent performance of the Trinidad and Tobago's economy is any indication of an outlook for the Trinidad and Tobago economy, then I remain optimistic about our direction and the future of where we're going. 2014 was probably the last year we saw an increase in GDP. And from then to now, it has been a slippery slope. And if at the end of this year, there is some element of a slowing down of a decline, or no growth, meaning a turn, or some element of positive GDP growth, then by all means, I will welcome that. So in recognizing that we are probably at the mid-term of the government, I thought it necessary to at least reflect on their performance, or the government's performance in the recent past. And I want to, and the Honorable Allyson West this morning indicated that because of the better than expected increases in natural gas production in the second half of 2017, the GDP figures for 2017 are being revised upwards, and we expect that instead of negative growth of minus 2.6% in 2017, the actual growth will be closer to minus 1%. And that I commend the government for, especially now giving a positive outlook for years to come. I have no way of really measuring or determining the vigor of the statistic, but I'm accepting the statistic and remain optimistic that it will materialize. The government must be commended for their efforts in managing the Trinidad and Tobago's economy amidst a declining revenue position and tight cash flow management. They must be commended for a smaller than projected deficit for the first half of 2018. Remembering that in 2017, at the end of fiscal 2016-2017, we recorded one of the largest deficits ever in the history of our country. So if we're at mid-year, we're saying, listen, it could be smaller than in this year than anticipated, then I welcome that. Government must be commended for defending the value of the currency, because if that runs away, the cost of living in this country will just skyrocket. The government must be commended for the increase in revenue earned from both the energy and non-energy sector. And from the business perspective, the funding of $100 million to the Exim Bank in support of local manufacturers, that is welcomed. The Economic Bulletin of Central Bank issue of March 18 also declares that a lower level of inflation was recorded. There was growth in private sector credit among commercial banks, and a smaller year-on-year deficit on the current account for the first 3 months of fiscal 2017-18. And in light of those statistics, I would like to commend the government for their management of the way in which they've handled it thus far. And if this indication is that there is light at the end of the tunnel, I would like to say we are only at the beginning of the tunnel. And therefore, if it presents a light, in order to see that light or get to that place, we must manage well here. These tough decisions are still to be taken, and that will allow us to get to where we'd like to go. So that as I've presented that in context, I'd like to get into the bill a little bit more. And the fiscal package of 2017-18 and the performance over the last 6 months. If we look at the revenue position of the budget, the revenue position indicated that government anticipated about $38.4 billion in tax and non-tax revenue. That would leave us just about $19 billion at the half-year approach. Government has indicated that they've collected close to $19.5 billion, which is just over the halfway threshold as projected. However, in terms of the economy, we've also seen with respect to the revenue position that taxes from oil companies have also increased. There's an increase in corporation tax from the petrochemical sector, and corporation tax of non-energy companies also increased. And the minister in the other place indicated total net collections in all sectors up year on year by $1.3 billion, so that there was a favorable drive of collection in terms of revenue. But How is it that we can have a favorable collection in revenue and greater than anticipated revenue collections in certain areas, and the anticipated revenue is just about the halfway mark? If revenue projections were materializing as projected, then we should have been over the halfway mark. But we're just about halfway, although there was favorable revenue collections in other areas. And in my mind, that is because the revenue projected from other areas did not materialize. Areas such as the property tax, 250 million, royalties and taxes from Petrotrin, and even revenue from the gaming sector, legislation which is yet to be passed. So as we increase our revenue collection from areas that we did not anticipate, we also lost revenue or losing revenue in areas that we were not able to collect from. And therefore, while we celebrate and acknowledge improved performances in other areas, we must be mindful of the areas that we did not collect and not anticipate a smaller deficit because some areas of this, or some sectors outperformed others, while not taking into account we did not collect from certain areas. With respect to expenditure, budget expenditure was approximately 50.5 billion. We've learned that there's a conscious effort on the part of the government to reduce expenditure to just about 48.88 billion. So therefore, we're seeing a reduction in expenditure. And I commend the government for at least looking at expenditure and looking at ways to find a way, or to find ways which we could reduce the expenditure. However, like revenue, we must be mindful that a significant part of the public sector investment program has not begun. And there's probably about $3 to $4 billion in that program yet to kick in. And we're just about 3 or 4 months from the end of the financial year. Further, we've recognized that because of the increase in oil and gas or the commodity prices, unforeseen expenditure, such as the increase in the fuel subsidy, will also come into effect, which could be in the vicinity of $1 billion. And therefore, unforeseen expenditure will also play a role in how significant or will impact on the deficit position at the end of the year. So while we cut in some areas, we need to plan for unpredicted expenditure. The budget deficit and financing. This is of concern to me. When the budget was presented, we came up with a deficit of about 4.76 billion after revenue and capital revenue. Page 32 of the budget statement states, Madam Speaker, and Honourable Minister presenting here, but at that time in the other place says, Madam Speaker, with domestic financing of 4.5 billion, an additional fiscal shortage is therefore required to be financed. That is saying to me that the deficit was to be funded from domestic financing, because it's in the budget statement, page 32. But on page 5 of the Honourable Minister in the other place, his response there, or his presentation there says, a fiscal deficit of 4.76 billion, or 3% of GDP, was projected to be financed through net external borrowing of 3.69 billion and net domestic borrowing of 1.07. So we're seeing here a difference now in how the budget deficit will be financed. First case was saying domestic. Now the mid-year we're saying external and domestic. So the government has presented an inconsistent position in my mind, a variation, I should say, not inconsistent, a variation in the way in which they would choose to finance this deficit. I am saying be very mindful of going to the external market to raise funding. Be very mindful. And why am I saying this? Because over the past 3 years, we've seen a 66% increase in the external debt position, taking it up to 3.5 billion. And the claim or the interest, the expense associated with it also increasing by a similar proportion, 65%. So if you go to the external market, our external obligation increases, our interest expense increases, and our claim to foreign exchange also increases, to our foreign exchange reserves. And so if we continue to go to the external market, these statistics or these measures or these nominal amounts will increase and will run away from us because we are at a place of tight foreign exchange reserves, very tight. So why are we rushing to the external market? And so I issue a word of caution as to the use of external financing increasing the debt profile of Trinidad and Tobago, especially against the backdrop that the first 3 months of fiscal 2017-2018, significant external loans were contracted by the government, and I quote from central bank reports again, March 2018, external debt increased to US 3.5 3.5 billion, 3,501 million or 3.5 billion in December 2017 from US 3.4 million, primarily due to a disbursement of 55 million, and they have identified the projects. It says, additionally, during the 3-month period under review, the government contracted a loan from the Export-Import Bank of China, estimated at 22.6. So what we're seeing here is that external debt is being driven up, and now we're seeing at the mid-year review, part of the deficit will also be financed using external financing, and I have some issue with that. But the question is also, why rush to external when there's domestic borrowing available? And as Senator Obika correctly said, and he quoted from the March 2018 Economic Bulletin, the level of borrowing from the government on the domestic sector actually affected the liquidity position of commercial banks. And central bank, and to use the exact phrase, central bank shored up liquidity in the financial system by allowing open market securities to enter the financial system. So the borrowing by the government on the domestic market created a liquidity situation amongst the commercial banks, and central bank had to intervene. So while we are optimistic about the outlook of Trinidad and Tobago, an increase in external debt can be more expensive due to the recent downgrades of the last 3 years. It will lead to an increased claim on foreign exchange. It will lead to an increase in the interest expense associated in foreign exchange. And domestic borrowing, we now have to be careful because it's now affecting liquidity. And putting Trinidad and Tobago in that place is saying, if it's any time we need to be cautious, it's now. Because the cost of external borrowing is increasing, and domestic borrowing is crowding out investment and creating liquidity problems. So we need to be very mindful. I touched on foreign reserves just a bit earlier on in my presentation. And I would like to say, Madam President, that in the mid-year review, there was a report, or the government, or the minister in the Honourable Minister in the other place did indicate that there was a recovery of foreign exchange in the period March to April 2018, indicating some element of strength. I appreciate the way in which it was constructed, but I would like to present this in the way in which I see it based on the facts of Central Bank. April 2017 to April 2018, there was a reduction in the foreign exchange reserves at Central Bank from 9.1 billion to 8.1 billion. That can't be a strength. And the next point is, over the period March to April 2018, the reserves at Central Bank fell, and in March, 7.988 billion, and just came up in April. It's the first time ever since 2008 that our foreign exchange reserves had entered the $7 billion mark. It was above. And therefore, I don't really see a recovery of March 2018 to April 2018 as a strength for the foreign exchange reserve position. It has deteriorated, and we need to be cognizant of that. And more so, it is very evident in the falling import cover, as Senator Obika said, at 10.25 in 2015, 9.5 in 2016, 9 months in 2018, and I heard 8 months this morning, I'm unsure. So we are seeing a fall in import cover. And if we're seeing a fall in import cover, it is saying that our foreign reserve position is weakening. So while I did commend the government for being able to hold or to defend the currency, because it is, in my view, that's one of their policies that they are rigidly sticking to, and I could understand why, I'm unsure of how sustainable that strategy is and for how long we'd be able to do it. Also, in Budget 2018, when it was presented, there was a new royalty regime that was proposed to be applied to the top line of energy companies. In my mind, and I'm sure my colleague on my right, Senator Small, may touch on it in his presentation, but that was a form of earning additional foreign exchange for the country, because I believe it would be paid in US dollars. And I thought that this mid-year review would have been a nice place to give us some element of an update on the performance of that tax, so as to know whether or not our US or our foreign currency position would positively be impacted by that measure. Madam President, with respect to the commodity prices, we've recognized here that over the past couple months that we're seeing an upswing in commodity prices, both in oil and gas. I'm more concerned, or I am concerned a little bit, about the commodity price that our budget was based on, and the commodity price being reflected here. I noted in the government's mid-year review, and the Honourable Minister, when he presented in the other place, he said that actually the average price of oil for the last 6 months would have been around $59, thereabout, for the last 2 quarters. And if we look at the Heritage and Stabilization Fund law, it's a saying here, Section 13 of that says, where petroleum revenues collected in each quarter of any financial year exceed the estimated petroleum revenues for that quarter of the financial year by more than 10%, the currency of the United States of America equivalent to the excess revenue shall be withdrawn from the consolidated fund and deposited to the fund in accordance with Section 14.1. What's my point here? $52 was the budget, $59 was the average price for 2 quarters. In my mind, and I could be wrong and I stand to be corrected, but in my mind, that increase in commodity price is greater than 10% of the budgeted value. And therefore, if there is an increase, in my mind, there should have been some element of indication to make a deposit into the HSF. If I'm wrong, I stand to be corrected. But even if no matter how small it is, according to the law, in my mind, if I am correct, it should have been done. And I ask for a little clarity with respect to that. I also know that not all of the revenue may have been collected because of the state of Petrotrin not being able to pay its royalties and taxes. But if that's the case, we have to be very mindful that Petrotrin, if that's the case, and I'm not making a pronouncement, I'm just raising a point, that if Petrotrin is unable to pay its dues for royalties and revenue from oil and gas, and it's depriving the HSF, it's something that we need to really consider or reconsider. It's an important point. Senator Obika, in his presentation, also touched on the exchequer account. Madam President, this is absolutely critical at this point in time. According to the Auditor General's report of 2017, the exchequer account has an overdraft of $36.5 billion. That's the account of the government. That's the account that government expenditure is being funded out of. And at the end of 2017, it is $36.5 billion. How can we manage an economy when the overdraft is increasing, has touched a level that this country has never seen before, and represents almost 1 year of tax and non-tax revenue? That is to say, if we are to clear this, it will take all the money earned from tax and non-tax revenue for 1 entire fiscal year to be cleared. And that is of concern. And we are allowing this exchequer account to just run away from us each year as it increases. And we carry on as though everything is well. It is not well. Further, Madam President, and Senator Obika was also right when he quoted the overdraft facility of the central bank. That too had a maximum of $10 billion in overdraft, which is really the net effect after the exchequer account is collateralized with the other funds in that account. And it's negative again, negative $10 billion. Senator Obika, and I support this point, where he said, and I'm quoting from the Auditor General's report here, projected revenue of 2017, not 2018, 2017 was $38 billion. Projected capital receipts, 8.74, so you had a total projected revenue of 46.8. The Central Bank Act allows for 15% at that time to be used as an overdraft. 15% of 46.8 is $7 billion. But the Auditor General is recording an overdraft of $10 billion. We are in violation of our own law with respect to the overdraft at Central Bank. 10 billion when it should really be 7. And if it is that it was at 10 billion in 2017, and in 2018 we are in a deficit position, and the estimated revenue is 45 billion, 20% now, because the rate has been changed, is 9 billion. But again, at the end of 2017, it was 10. I do not have the data, and I ask, what is the net balance at the overdraft facility of the central bank? Are we in keeping with the law that is before us? That was heavily debated here. With respect to net public sector debt, we are seeing net public sector debt also running away from us. We could use the measure that net public sector to GDP is coming down because GDP is increasing. But government does not get direct revenue from GDP. Government gets taxation revenue from GDP. And therefore, to use it as a measure to bring it down is not really a comforting one because it does not affect your cash flow position. It does not affect your ability to repay debt. And it does not affect the way in which interest payments on debt is incurred. It doesn't. So using that is just a statistic to justify a position in our mind when our cash flow position is not allowing us to sustain the level of debt and service the level of debt. And if you look at the Auditor General's report in 2017 again, you will recognize here that the charges against the tax and non-tax revenue against debt service, which is debt, principal repayment, interest payment, and sinking fund, reached a maximum of 30% in 2017. So 30% of our tax and non-tax revenue is going towards debt service. And here it is, we're going to increase debt again. So more of our revenue, as long as our revenue, or should our revenue remain around 45 billion, or should it remain around 38 billion, I should say, tax and non-tax revenue, then a greater proportion of that money is going towards debt. We are actually digging a hole. And we need to be able to get to that place where we start to climb out of it rather than add to it or deepen the hole. The CLICO and its debt repayment plan. This was very comprehensively addressed again by the minister when he laid his mid-year review. But I want to advise on a word of caution here. The minister was very articulate in how he was going to collect this money and estimated about $10 billion by June 2018. But I want to remind this Honorable House that revenue from sale of CLICO assets was accounted for or budgeted for in 2017. And I can quote from the statement here. It said here, it is noteworthy, and this is Budget Statement 2017, total revenue in 2017, this is Budget Statement 2018 with the Minister just reflecting on 2017's performance. Total revenue in 2017 was thus roughly 10 billion lower than envisaged, largely because of the shortfall in the above-mentioned areas, and he was speaking to the CLICO debt. So it is that we anticipated revenue in 2017. It did not occur, so we borrowed. And now we're seeing in 2018, we're anticipating revenue again. Should the revenue materialize, there should be a conscious effort on the part of the government to use that revenue derived from the sale of assets to service the debt that was incurred to have revenue, to improve the revenue position of 2017. If it is that all of it is being used for 2018 budget support, then our debt position remains unaddressed. And we have worsened our debt position and claim to interest payments. Because after the sale of CLICO assets, I'm unsure of when next such a capital receipt of revenue can come about as a result of a sale of assets. That may be the largest capital receipt that we may ever be able to get for a long time. I stand corrected if I'm wrong, but I do not know of any other. So, Madam President, I've touched on some variables with respect to the budget performance, and economic indicators. And for the next couple minutes of my presentation, I would just like to look at the variations and the supplemental requests for funding from the various ministries. And I'd just like to comment briefly on it, and I'm sure the honourable ministers would be in a very good position to respond to my concerns. With respect to the judiciary, we're seeing here a variation, or an increase, I should say, in a request for funding for contract employment for the Judiciary Trinidad and under the Children's Court. The increase from the judiciary being 15% of contract employment and 175% increase for contract employment under the Children's Court. And these are meant for positions to facilitate the payment of salaries to contract officers at the end of fiscal year, and to fill vacant positions which were filled, or to provide for funding for positions filled in 2018. So we're seeing at the judiciary a 15% increase and a 175% increase for funding meant for contract employment. If we go to the Service Commission under General Administration, contract employment again, a 50% increase is being sought, 905 million, for again positions there. And if we go to the Tax Appeal Board, we'll realize under contract employment, 150% increase for funding for salaries based on contract employment. What's my point? Of 3 heads here presented in this bill today, we're seeing an increase in funding being requested for contract employment. And the government is aware that wages and salaries constitute a significant expense of annual recurrent expenditure, and there must be a conscious effort to manage that variable. But what we're seeing here is an increase in funding for the same expense now under contract employment. So while the government is saying we've been able to maintain wages and salaries at one figure, the figure for contract employment, which is really wages and salaries if you think about it, is increasing. And we're seeing it here in 3 heads. So wages, overall salaries, wages and salaries of the government, when you include contract positions, is on the increase. And it's a position that we must address. With respect to the Office of the Prime Minister, we're seeing here an increase in funding requested for NIPDEC, for a NIPDEC loan, principal repayment, and that's important. Principal repayment, NIPDEC loan, and interest payments on the NIPDEC loan. And the increase is 120%, moving from 6 million to 14 million. How is it that as we manage an economy and we have a debt profile, that we can miss a principal repayment in calculating our debt repayment position? Everybody must know what debt they owe. And therefore, everyone must know when principal payments are due. How is it that we can present a position of a principal repayment not budgeted for? And that, in my mind, is not making sense. And this brings me back, and let me just touch the other point, which is Ministry of Housing. The same thing occurred with Ministry of Housing. UDICOT principal payment on 223 million fixed rate loan, an increase of 11,200,000. What's going on here? When you have principal payments not being accounted for in budget statements, and then in variations, we are seeing principal payments coming up. Now, everyone would remember, and if it's one thing this senator has been asking for since I got here in 2015, is a debt management strategy for Trinidad and Tobago. The Honorable Minister of Finance gave that undertaking that he would provide it to us when we debated the credit limits, increases in credit limits. To date, it has not been provided. So we don't know what the overall debt position of Trinidad and Tobago is. We don't know what the overall position is in terms of net public sector debt, contingent liabilities, the state enterprises debt on their own balance sheets, not accounted for by contingent liabilities, and government-to-government arrangements. We don't know. And in my mind, I am going to make a statement here that government themselves don't know, because if you had known, you would have provided it to me after 2.5 years. And if it is you knew, then you would not you would not have a situation where principal payments are falling due and you're unaware and now coming for a variation. In my mind, something is wrong. Something is wrong. And I would really like, and even if I'm wrong, I stand to be corrected, but I would really like to see the debt repayment strategy or the debt management strategy for the increasing debt profile that the government is laying on Trinidad and Tobago. That's a simple request. I'm not shooting down your strategy, and I'm not saying I'm not supporting you. I have one simple request: debt management strategy for Trinidad and Tobago for the next 5 years, showing us how it's going to be amortized as well. Simple. That's my request. With respect to the Ministry of Public Utilities, Ministry of Public Utilities is getting the largest chunk of variations of all presented. That is in the form of street lighting, refunds to WASA, and refunds to TNTEC. Again, with all due respect, Honorable Minister, I know you're here, and this has no personal issues. I'm just raising a concern, and I'm sure you'll be able to address it, because we've always had constructive conversations. With respect to street lighting, a move from 50 million to 111 million, a variation of 125%. With respect to the refunds to WASA, 160 million to 220 million, a variation of 38%. And the one that bothers me the most is the refunds to TNTech, 30 million to 78 million, an increase of 48 million. Why is that bothering me? That is bothering me because it is said here in the budget statement that TNTech has to reimburse these funds as a result of the subsidy provided to citizens because of the $300 or because of the rebate given to customers with bills of $300 or less. If you allow me to quote or to do the budget math, it is saying here that 120,000 households would benefit from this grant. That was in the budget statement. 120,000 households by $300 because that's the limit. By 6 billing cycles for the year because it's every 2 months. It comes up to $216 million. A 25% rebate, $54 million. If the rebate at 120,000 households for $300 per house is $54 million, then how are we getting to 78? And I'm unsure of that. So I ask for some element of clarification. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to touch on agriculture for 1 sec with the Honorable, I'm sure the Honorable Minister, Clarence Rambrat, would be able to help me here. And it's just a management issue I would like to raise here. We're seeing an agriculture incentive program move from 12 million to 43 million, a $31 million increase, 260%. And that was meant for subsidies for farmers. But if you look at the performance of the agricultural sector, negative 2.1% in 13, 3.2 in 2014, year-on-year increases, 15.1 negative in 2016, and negative 2.8 in 2017. My question is, and it's purely from a management perspective, why is it that we are increasing subsidies to farmers in an environment that is not producing an output associated with it? If we are subsidizing activity, it should be geared towards turning or changing the production volumes in that ministry and bringing it up. Are we investing in areas that are not bringing a return that we would like? And that's a concern of mine. So with the last couple of minutes I have, Madam President, because I know it's just about 6 minutes I would have left, I would just like to recap on what I've said before. And there was one important point that I would like to address, and it's the Infrastructural and Development Fund, just before I summarize. In 2016 and 2017, we saw a depletion of the Infrastructure and Development Fund, according to the Auditor General's report, from 1 billion to 330 million.
Senator Shrikissoon, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. From 1 billion to 330 million. So we saw a decrease in the value of the Infrastructure and Development Fund to a tune of $700 million. Here it is in this variation bill, in order to finance finance other areas of the budget, we are now taking $796 million out, well, from that was previously allocated to the IDF for budget support. Now, when funds go into the IDF, it is meant for capital projects. And now we're saying, with a couple of months to go to the end of the financial year, we are withdrawing funding out of this fund for the purpose of budget support. Trinidad and Tobago is at a time where we need to stimulate economic activity. And withdrawing funds from the Infrastructural and Development Fund will not materialize in increased economic activity, and when it goes to budget support, it just becomes diluted or lost into the economy. Why is it for 2 successive years we are taking $1.4 billion out of the Infrastructural and Development Fund, and I'm unsure of what was used for in 2017, but in 2018 for budget support? I don't think that when funds go into the Infrastructural and Development Fund, it was meant for withdrawal later on for budget support. It was meant for capital projects. And then what specific capital projects are not being addressed, given that this increased funding is coming out of that fund? Which projects are not being undertaken, and that's not given? So I ask for that question to be answered. So, Madam President, in wrapping up, I am delighted to see that there is the possibility of an improved economic performance via GDP for Trinidad and Tobago. And if nothing else gives me an element of hope, that does. and I commend you for that. But with respect to the fiscal accounts of Trinidad and Tobago, the fiscal health of Trinidad and Tobago, I am concerned. Why am I concerned? Because I've shown that we can experience an increase in revenue from areas not anticipated. However, we may have a problem of areas of revenue that we projected not materializing. With respect to expenditure, I've also said that while we curtail expenditure, there are areas of expenditure unforeseen that will pop up. With respect to the deficit, I'm a little bit confused as to the real funding requirement of how the deficit will be financed, because we saw inconsistent positions, or varied positions, I should say, I made the same error, varied positions in budget statement and the mid-year review. With respect to the net public sector debt, it's running away from us. And so we need to be mindful of how we borrow externally, because the interest rates would be up, and how we borrow domestically, because it's crowding out liquidity in our system. That's a key point. I have shown that with respect to the Auditor General's report, a significant portion of our tax and non-tax revenue, up to 30% in 2017, was used for debt servicing, debt repayment and debt servicing. With respect to the foreign exchange, our foreign exchange reserves are declining, no matter how you say it. And it will place pressure on our economy. With respect to the HSF, I've asked for some element of clarity as to whether or not the law would have required us to make some element of deposits. With respect to the exchequer account, that has totally run away from us, and no one seems to want to address it or bring this down. And so much so, the overdraft facility at Central Bank may be at levels very close to the limits, and as in 2017, over the legal threshold. With respect to our debt position, I've asked that the funds derived from the sale of assets from CLICO also be used to bring the debt levels down, and not primarily for budget support. And I've raised a significant concern with respect to the funding or the provision of funding for budget support coming from the Infrastructural and Development Fund meant for capital projects. I really am concerned about that. So, Madam President, as I conclude, I commended the government for your approach, and I understand your cautious approach, and I thank you for your approach because it was leading to some element of recovery of GDP. But the fiscal health of Trinidad and Tobago is in trouble. And therefore, a fiscal consolidation program is required to restore health to the balances of Trinidad and Tobago. While you could be the recipient, or GDP could be increasing, fiscal balances at Trinidad and Tobago is required. And while I ask for a debt management strategy to be laid, or to at least be made available to us to show how debt will be serviced, I ask also to show me how the fiscal balances of Trinidad and Tobago will be restored. I thank you, Madam President.
Minister of Trade and Industry.
Thank you, Madam President. I think everybody would agree that that is a real economist. And Senator Shrikissoon, I want to thank you for your excellent remarks. I want to thank you for your, but for Senator Obika, I will have to go to the internet and seek out what his degree is, because I really didn't get an indication of whether you're an economist, finance person, what are your specialists. He's telling me both, but I will have to listen on for years to come to be reassured of that. But Senator Shrikissoon, thank you very much for your it's an excellent presentation. Given credit to the government for work that it is doing, being positive, and giving the assurance to the population that we are on the right track. You've raised some reasonable concerns, and I'm sure that they will be addressed by the finance specialists and my colleagues as well with regard to their various ministries. But Madam President, I thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this variation of Appropriation Bill 2018. And again, I always thank my colleagues, the Minister of Finance, who spoke to the matter and gave a quite inspiring presentation in the lower house, and of course the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, who added to it and again brought us very insightful thoughts and showed how we are on a very measured approach to economic recovery. And it is in no secret that in 2015, no matter how you try to hide it, Senator Obika, the country did inherit a depreciated economy, if you want to call it that, and which was reflective of wanton wastage, poor management, and irresponsible expenditure. There's no doubt about it that for those reasons, and there are other reasons as well, this is why the economy has suffered, especially when we came into office 2015, 2016, 2017. And we're now seeing a turnaround, and we're very, very, very happy that the minister was able to prevent this turnaround from the previous tide of economic malaise and stagnation and deception. We are moving forward on this side with optimism and with confidence. And I'm very pleased that the very worthy independent senator was able to share that with us. And I want to just reflect a little bit on what the Minister of Finance said, and just we will all remind the population that GDP is up 9% to $168 billion in 2018. That debt is down. Net public sector debt to GDP ratio is now 55% compared to 62% in 2017. That the deficit is shrinking, that the fiscal deficit for 2018 is now projected to be $4.2 billion, down $500 million. That prices are holding, that headline inflation fell to 1.3% by the end of 2017, which is the lowest in many years. That employment is stable. Yes, there have been some jobs lost, but it is still relatively stable, with an unemployment rate of 5%. And that our U.S. reserves are stable. Net official reserves currently at $8.11 billion US dollars, or 9 months, I correct the minister, 9 months of import cover. And that the Heritage and Stabilization Fund is growing, and it is over US $200 million higher than it was in September 2015. And this is despite the extraction of, I think, $600 million US by us in 2016. And again, I just want to affirm that there was no downgrade. No downgrade. Standard & Poor's affirmed our BBB plus rating, and this is the first time in 3 years that we have not been downgraded. So, Madam President, I'm delighted to speak about the Ministry of Trade and Industry and our contribution to this rebound or a reversal and positive reversal in the economic trends of this country. Senator Obika, you came to us and I'm not sure you're going to be able to retain your batting order because your position in your batting order, because you really offered no hope to this population at all. You were, to my mind, you were very negative. All you spoke about was the fact that the economy crashed, and you spoke about some growth polls. Senator, you should never mention that around here.
Minister, talk to me, please.
Sorry, the only growth poll that you focused on was Chaguanas and Central, and nowhere else. There was no growth in Point 14. You did nothing for the people of Point 14, and you will never be able to win that seat, so you better not go up. You did nothing for the East-West corridor, nothing for Tobago, and we know where you are with Tobago now. Despite the presence of Senator Julian John here today, we know what's happening with you in Tobago. There's no possibilities for you there at all. But the point about it is, you can't be so negative, especially when your government did nothing about diversification. You came here talking about diversification in the last sentences of your presentation. Not all you spoke about are these growth polls. Diversification, you were a colorblind government, because you only spoke about this blue economy. You gave yourself some kind of gift. Remember they gave themselves an award about blue economy. You spoke about the blue, the silver economy, the green economy, but at the end of the day, you have nothing to show. So it just tells us that you were colorblind and you did not know what you were doing. You had no success in the area of diversification, and you just relied. You relied on $108 per barrel oil.
Members, Senator Mean, I'm sure you will make use of your opportunity when you have to present. Okay? Minister, continue, please.
Yeah. So diversification was not on your agenda. And the criticism which you levied on the Honorable Minister of Finance, great and successful as he is, I can tell you was unjustified. He had a 55-minute presentation to speak about the positive nature of the economy and the turnaround. You obviously didn't listen to the rest of the ministers. So that if you had, you would have been properly elucidated about what's going on in the ministries and the work that this government is doing. So I'm going to speak about trade. I invite you to listen to my colleagues this afternoon when you will learn something that, and you will discover the trend on which we are, and you would understand that and you would understand why we certainly will win the next election and we will retain our position on this side. So I invite you to listen and to learn. And you know, madam, let me go into diversification. It's a pet subject. And historically, it is this government that has always diversified this economy. If you go back to 100 years ago, we were an agricultural economy. And then, of course, you had the commercialization of oil. Then we went into the monetization of gas. Then we went into the development of the petrochemical sector. And then we went into the development of the manufacturing sector. So that, in a sense, this is not only an energy economy. It's a well-diversified economy with a predominance of activity in the energy sector and in the industrial sector and in the manufacturing sector. And we are well on our way to shoring up revenues on the non-energy side to ensure that the economy is on a path that is more resistant to shock, in particular energy shock, and of course saving ourselves from the fact that we are still price takers and we continue to be affected by that. So as I speak about energy, Madam President, about the non-energy sector, and there are some economists who have been speaking about the consistent decline in revenues on the non-energy sector, and they're comparing where we were in 2015 to where we are now. And I want to say that part of that significant gap which we're seeing in the revenues is because of the exit of ArcelorMittal. But if you look further into the food and beverage sector, of the manufacturing sector in particular, you would see that despite the low demand in the Trinidad economy, that the revenue streams are stable. And in fact, there is a slight increase. If you go into the numbers, when we go to the budget later this year, we will speak to the numbers, and that there is a slight increase. And I will speak to where this is coming from. So that despite the low demand locally, which Christopher Alcazar would have spoken about, there is great hope for this sector, and the ministry has been focusing on the manufacturing sector. And of course, we look to the end. We look to the closure of the work of the liquidator with ArcelorMittal, and indeed we are quite hopeful of the replacement of another like industry, which will certainly shore up the figures on the non-energy side. With regard to the manufacturing sector, I want to say that the relationship between the manufacturers and the government is a very, very healthy one. We continue to work well with the manufacturing sector, and I looked at the comments which were produced by the TTMA on the mid-year review, and they did speak about the impact of the turnaround on the local on the local market. They spoke about the fact that the local market continues to be soft and sluggish, but they did in fact congratulate the government, and if I can quote Mr. Christopher Alcazar in the release on the mid-year review, we are very pleased to hear the positive news from the Minister of Finance and congratulate him on the results, as well as congratulate him on taking important positive steps towards creating the optimum business environment in which we can thrive, therefore driving exports and employment upwards. And then he went on to speak about the two important steps which were really recently discussed, namely the Exim Bank facility to ensure manufacturers can access the US dollar facility, can access US dollars. And secondly, he announced that in the coming weeks, there will be the launch of the incremental export increase incentive, and so we can look forward to that. So very, very positive news. But I want to tell you that the Ministry of Trade and Industry has been focusing on its trade missions, and in the last 6 months, there would have been trade missions to Costa Rica, to Panama, to Cuba, to Cuba in late November, to Guyana, and also to Jamaica. Some of them I was able to do, and some of them were headed by the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Trade and Industry. And I want to take a little time to tell you about that Cuba market, which we've been working on, and the successes which we're having. And it is that they are now, and I'll tell you something, Madam President, that the registration process in a lot of the Latin American countries and the Spanish-speaking countries is a little bit bureaucratic, so that the registration process is quite cumbersome. And we've been working, thankfully, our Trade Facilitation Office in Cuba has been working diligently, and we are seeing the results. So that they have now declared several manufacturers in Trinidad and Tobago potential supplier status. So that's Vemco, Casey Candy, SM Jaleel, Associated Brands, Answer Coatings, Blue Waters, Tricon, Hadco, Trinidad Tissues. All of those companies are now fully registered and will expect to receive orders and begin exporting to Cuba. And that is despite the fact that that one in particular, it is Sasha Cosmetics, is already exporting to Cuba. But Carib Beer, for instance, Carib Beer, I can tell you, Cuba's own local production of beers does not satisfy the demand there. You're talking about 11 million people and 4 to 5 million tourists. So Carib Beer is high on the agenda. Trinidad Tissues is already well entrenched in the market with their Nueve Blanco product. Carib Glass has already started exporting bottles to Cuba Ron. And so coatings will also begin exports shortly. There's a possible opening into the Cuban rum market as well. So despite the fact that we are already well entrenched in terms of the orange and the traditional bitters, which is in which is in all of their duty-free stores and many stores within Cuba, there is the strong possibility for Angostura of exporting Trinidad and Tobago's rum into Cuba as well. Vemco, again, is Casey Candy, I call them out. Phoenix Park Gas and National Petroleum are now also fully registered, so that we expect to be exporting all of many of our products from NP and to Cuba as well. And so that we look forward, especially now that Caribbean Airlines is well entrenched, we look forward to the opening up of that market. And I'm really very pleased with the work of our Trade Facilitation Office there. This is an exciting market, and I can see keen growth coming from this area. With regard to Panama, I would tell you that I would have gone to Panama and Costa Rica, and I'll tell you why. Again, because of the bureaucratic arrangements, because of the fact that we're accustomed to signing agreements and not implementing. I went along primarily to do the political footwork. So I can tell you that I would have met with my counterparts both in Panama and in Costa Rica. And now that there's a determined effort to implement the agreements which we have and to ensure that our products get into those markets. I can tell you that several B2B, it was a small contingent of manufacturers. I feel that manufacturers are a little bit shy of venturing out of the Caribbean region, which they've become so accustomed to. But there were excellent B2B meetings, business-to-business meetings on both sides, and all of these manufacturers have come away very, very positive indeed. And so with regard to Jamaica, we had a very successful meeting with Jamaica as well. The permanent secretary was there, and I can tell you that many of the businesses that went along, I think 19 businesses, actually got increased orders. And of course, they were, through all of the meetings held, they were able to settle on a couple of matters which were of concern to the Jamaican manufacturers. It is that Jamaica aims now to supply us with inputs into our manufacturing sector, and so I can see that the relationship is one which will augur well for both countries, Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. With regard to market access, the work of Export TT continues to be of considerable benefit, and particularly for the small and medium-sized manufacturers. And so that there continues to be a significant amount of capacity building and training for exporters. We have launched the Export Competitiveness Project, and we are working directly with several companies and getting them out there into markets. I'm talking about companies which perhaps had never exported. So that, and 8 companies, for instance, have been identified for certification in international standards. There were 17 exporter training programs conducted. We actually helped about 18 companies, and they are now new exporters. We are also working with Tobago to boost their export development as well. There's an export strategy with our Export TT and the manufacturers in Tobago. There are 13 firms that have been identified, and there's targeted training with them. We continue as well to work on our trade facilitation through our WTO agreement, and of course the ministry continues this work with policy development as well. I wanted to speak a little bit about a new policy that was launched, which is the National Quality Policy, and the importance of this, long-term as it is, because it takes us well into 2030, and it enhances the work of the Bureau of Standards, and it is there to improve our competitiveness. What we want to make sure with our manufacturers is that we are able to produce globally competitive products that are of an international standard, and that can be differentiated on the basis of quality and value, and not only on the basis of price. So this national quality policy ensures that Trinidad and Tobago becomes fully compliant with international norms and practices. When you ask our manufacturers and several of our businesses, what are the issues? What prevents you from increasing your exports, or even venturing into exporting into markets beyond the region? And they'll tell you they're the challenges of stringent quality that is the norm with the international market. And it is that this national quality policy will in fact address all of these challenges and increase the competitiveness of our products, and of course, and the ability to participate in the international value chain. It will also ensure that it will also help to develop and to enforce our technical regulations and practices which support the production and creation of high-quality goods and services. And a peeve of mine, and I'm sure many people, would be our labs, the poor state of our labs, especially our medical labs. I can tell you that of all the medical labs that exist in Trinidad and Tobago, only possibly 2 of them are accredited. So it is of a concern to the population, and I'm soon to bring now that we've passed this national quality note. It has been approved by Cabinet, and we're on our way to implementing. One of my first notes will surround the accreditation of labs, medical labs and other labs which have to do with the manufacturing processes and so on. So as I said, this is a very, very, very important project, and we look forward to the full implementation. And so to ensure again that our consumers are protected, that our population is protected as well. But most importantly, we want to see our local products on the global market as well. We're looking at high quality products as well. And for Trinidad to be known and to be branded as producers of high quality products. And with all of that in mind, I want to say that the ministry has engaged the services of ECLAC, and by the end of this fiscal period, we will in fact have a new trade policy where we've begun work with them. And this is the direction that we must go to. If we are to focus on non-energy revenues, it is that the Ministry of Trade and Industry has a fundamental role to play, and therefore we must go back and examine our trade policy. And it is in this regard that we will, by the next budget, produce our new trade policy. I can tell you that there are a number of issues that we have, projects that are in the Ministry of Trade and Industry and in all of the agencies under us. Funding is an issue. We can't rely totally on the government to supply funding for all of the projects that we want to do to be able to improve our competitiveness and to get our trade facilitation going. And so therefore, I want to commend the professional staff within the Ministry of Trade for the donor week which they just had. What they did is they brought in 7 international donors and listed for them all of the projects that we are working on throughout the Ministry of Trade and Industry, include some big, some small, so that we can look at donor funding for several of them. And I will list some of them. For instance, export promotion of SMEs in Tobago, an exporter's guidebook, Fit for Europe Phase 2, cocoa processing facility and a microbiological laboratory, registration of a geographical indication in cocoa, value chain investment program and annual national fashion trade show, the artist development program, a number of development programs and quality projects. And I'm very pleased that we have been able to do this, to host this Aid for Trade Donor Week, at which these 24 projects were presented. The question is, what else we are doing for this, in particular for the small and medium-sized manufacturers? And this is in addition to the number of incentives that already exist, and the fact that our manufacturers can, in fact, bring in. Despite our challenges, we continue to ensure that all of these incentives remain, that all our manufacturers can bring in their raw materials duty-free, and all of their machinery and equipment duty-free as well. But in addition to that, and in addition to the new facility which was launched by the Minister of Finance, which is the US $100 million foreign exchange facility to assist export-oriented manufacturers. And I want to emphasize that this is not only about big business, as Senator Obika raised. It's not only about big business. The Minister of Finance was very careful to say that even though there are manufacturers, small, medium, he said fledgling, that do not meet the criteria of 30% exports, they will in fact be assisted. But we have to ensure that there is some legitimacy to their request, and it is that Exim Bank is charged with that assessment, but they are not going to be left out because this government is focusing on small and medium-sized manufacturers. We're encouraging people to turn to manufacturing as a business model, as an alternative business model. But in addition to that, we look forward, in just a short time, the Ministry of Finance will in fact implement its project, which it announced, the facility which will allow startups across a wide range of sectors, ICTs, manufacturing, and agro-processing as well, 100,000 per person. Facility, and that is going to be launched pretty soon. But it is the grant fund facility which we launched in November last year, which has attracted quite a bit of business, quite a bit of activity. So the facility which was launched is to focus on the printing and publishing, beauty and personal care products, cocoa processing, including the manufacture of chocolate, food and beverage manufacture. In short order, it's manufacturing and agro-processing. And I want to say that the response to this grant funding facility has been quite healthy. It's a fund where $250,000 is available per manufacturer, per agro-processor, and it's for the purchase of machinery and equipment. Now, whilst we have had a number of, we've had a lot of interest, we've only granted 2 conditional, we have only approved 2 conditional grants, and I'm going to speak to those when we come to the population with it. One of them in particular is an agro-processing facility, and it's a chocolate manufacturer. And at the time when we are in fact given the grant, I will give more details on that. But again, we invite, and we're going to in fact continue to market and to communicate these facilities that are available to businesses, large, small, and medium, and we are going to be embarking on marketing and communicating all of these facilities that are available. Also, the research and development facility, which was launched by the Export TT as well. The ministry also launched a national consumer policy, perhaps just about 2 months ago, and that policy is to focus on the regulation and the further empowerment of consumers and in their interests. And it's about, generally, at the end of the day, we want the policy the success of it to favor the consumer, their rights and their interests. And of course, coming out of that, we hope to have a new, harmonized and effective consumer protection legislation. We want to ensure that our consumers are more informed, more empowered, and we are also going to put in place very effective institutional arrangements to address consumer issues. The new policy speaks to the establishment of a tribunal, which is to provide efficient and inexpensive and binding modalities for settling consumer disputes. We are in this implementation stage of this consumer policy, which is to benefit the people of Trinidad and Tobago, to ensure that their rights and so on, with their consumer rights and interests, are well served. We've also launched an e-commerce policy, and you may say that, and I'll tell you something, we're doing a lot of work in terms of policy, because you can't, it's not an overnight success. You can't hope to have overnight success in terms of non-energy revenues and so on, unless you first attend to your policy and you implement and you fix the environment. Though that's the way you start. So I can tell you safely that there would have been no interest by any other government, no serious interest, if you did not start in the way that we have started, ensuring that the environment is enhanced. So that the e-commerce policy, which our cabinet has approved, and we are currently finalizing the implementation plan, really serves to ensure that we have a very holistic e-commerce ecosystem that benefits consumers, but more importantly, it's going to benefit businesses, especially small and micro businesses, medium-sized businesses as well. And it means that they are able to achieve global reach for their product very easily by exhibiting their goods on the internet, by conducting sales on the internet, and this is how those small. This is another way in which those small manufacturers can in fact grow. Another important role and another important function that we've been focusing on in the Ministry of Trade is the provision of economic spaces, and none of which were, and in fact I had said at the budget period, none of that was done by the last government. The last government provided no new economic spaces at all for businesses to thrive in this country. And I want to say that we continue to work on the Tamina Intech Park, late as it is. We are very focused in ensuring that this park is in fact filled. We are employing a number of strategies to do so, but I'm quite excited to speak a little bit about the new agro-processing and light industrial park, which was launched by this government only last week. We had a sod turning ceremony in Maruga. This is a project which is being managed by Udicot with construction to be being undertaken by Roscon Limited. This project will be delivered in 2019, perhaps by April 2019, March, April 2019. We're very excited about the establishment of this facility, which is to boost agro-processing and light industrial manufacturing in a very rural area in Trinidad and Tobago. And this is something that Moruga perhaps has never seen. So the reason why we took a decision to actually build some shells initially will be so that together with our marketing campaign, by the time these shells are ready, by the time the park is in fact ready, we can have activity going there. We're very focused on the kinds of products that we can see being utilized in this agro-processing center. And later on, when and we've been talking about the Moruga fishing facility, when this is in fact announced, and it's going to be very soon, when the construction of this commences, it is that, again, these two facilities will dovetail nicely, and it is that produce from the Moruga fishing facility will in fact be processed or can be processed at the Moruga agro-processing and light industrial park. So therein lies the nexus and the connectivity between the work that we're doing with the Moruga fishing facility and also the Moruga light manufacturing sector park and agro-processing park. Cabinet also agreed to the Phoenix Park Industrial Estate, and I spoke about that a little bit. And I want to say that we're well on our way to ensuring that this gets off the ground very quickly. And this is what we want out of this Phoenix Park Industrial Estate is, in fact, a state-of-the-art industrial estate. It's 133 acres, and we expect to have about 50 to 60 businesses there, a range of businesses we expect in the area of high-value manufacturing, light manufacturing, logistics and warehousing, emerging industries as well. And there's keen interest, Madam President. I can tell you, I'm not at liberty to disclose the name as yet, that we're working with one major international firm who we expect to be our anchor tenant. And this tenant, once we are able to close on it, will in fact occupy 10 acres out of this 133 acres. The prospects are great. There's also key interest shown by other manufacturers, international manufacturers, and we expect to generate, when this park is fully complete, and again because of its close proximity to the port of Point Lisas, we expect to generate jobs in the order of thousands. I would imagine, I can safely say 3,000 jobs at the time of full occupation of the park, and of course in the construction stage as well, considerable jobs. And Madam President, I will speak to it when in fact we have closed and tied up all that we need to begin the implementation or the construction, of this park. The ministry as well is working together with the Ministry of Works and Transport to take over or to bring under the reins of ETEC the Piarco Aero Park, which is another 68 hectares of land that is earmarked for all kinds of activities, cargo activities, commercial activities, hospitality activities, and so on. And whilst it is that the Ministry of Works and Transport, through the Airports Authority, has done some work on the development of the park, we will now accelerate.
Minister, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you. We will now accelerate through the ETEC. Through ETEC, we will accelerate the development of this 68 hectares of land as well in the east of Trinidad. So again, another economic space that is opening up for business activity, both local and foreign. New projects for this particular 6 months. The new projects that have come on stream, the battery assembly plant, which I know that they already have a container ready for export, and I think the launch is going to take place soon. But they already are in motion and they are producing batteries for export. Also, and also the Hadco Ice Cream Factory. We know that they have begun production, and that's also geared for export. Their launch is to take place in June as well. We also in June will witness a sod turning of a new hatchery, which will produce a number of chicks, so that again will curb our import bill, and of course improve our hatchery production, and of course our hatchery and chicken production for export, not only for the local market but also for export. So in the area of diversification, there are a number of other areas that we're working on, and certainly in the maritime sector, and the standing committee continues to meet. There's much work which has been done in the area of transshipment and coal stacking. The cabinet has now approved a policy for transshipment and coal stacking, and the marketing of these services is now well underway. InvestTT is getting involved in the marketing of these transshipment and coal stacking opportunities. There are a number of other projects, including the Tobago Marina, which an RFP has already gone out in the press. There's been much focus as well on the yachting policy, and we actually are now implementing our marketing and promotional plan. We've developed a safety program to ensure the safety of cruisers. We've worked on the standard operating procedures for immigration officers. We have developed guidelines for the environmental practices for marinas and boatyards, and we're well on our way. In fact, this weekend we will support a yachting regatta. We haven't seen regattas in this country for a long time, and the Ministry of Trade and Industry will be supporting the return of yachting regattas to this country. That's in Tobago this weekend as well. The Tobago sailing, this weekend, the Tobago sailing regatta. The live music district. Creative TT is creating a lot of interest with its live music district. And this initiative, again, is intended to provide opportunities for local artists, but it's also intended to grow the non-energy sector as well. It's a fundamental pillar in terms of growing our music industry. We would have, the idea is that we want to have music, focus on live music all year round, and to develop a local music ecosystem. Madam President, we would have held on Arifita Avenue just 3 weeks ago in collaboration with BPTT, the BP Renegades, and the Port of Spain Corporation joined with us to produce an exciting and exhilarating concert that was enjoyed by thousands in the population. So we continue our work there, also in fashion with our fashion value chain investment program. The bespoke tailoring program is a huge success, despite some of the negativity that is out there. It's a major success. 33 students are enrolled, some on an evening program, some on a full-time program, and the Ministry of Trade and Industry is working with the Ministry of Education and the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago and the National Training Agency as well, with the aim of obtaining certification and accreditation of this bespoke tailoring program. Down the road, there's a long view with regard to this tailoring program. I see us developing a tailoring industry where we would in fact be exporting male garments out of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, there's a lot more that I can say, particularly about our reforms, but we are very committed to reforming through the single electronic window and through of course, the ease of doing business, and at all times improving our position on the Global Competitiveness Index. I thank you.
Senator John,
thank you.
But Senator John,
thank you.
At this stage, though, honourable senators, we will suspend and we will return at 2 p.m. Right?